Hello and welcome to the Cameralabs Cafe podcast. I'm Doug Kay. I'm here with Mr. Cameralabs, Gordon Lang, and today we're going to be taking a look at using cameras for video. In particular, we're going to take a look at vlogging and what camera you might want to use if you're a vlogger or an aspiring vlogger. Good morning or good afternoon, Gordon. How are you?
I'm good, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing terrifically well. Video, vlogging, huh? This is more your thing than mine, but I'm telling you, I'm really interested in it. So let's dive right in.
Okay, now we're going to pitch this as a guide to choosing the perfect vlogging camera, but since so much of that is also shared with what makes the perfect camera for filming video, don't be frightened off if you're not a vlogger, if you're somebody who prefers to be behind the camera. Even if you're not filming people, there is still going to be some useful information for you here. So yeah, let's delve straight into this. Now, I recorded a video about what makes the perfect vlogging camera a long time ago, and playing it back just before we filmed this episode made me realize, in fact, how little has changed in that period. Even though technology has moved on, it's amazing how those principles still remain. So there's four main things that I look for when I'm choosing the perfect vlogging camera, and some of them unfortunately clash with each other, and you will also find that there are very few cameras that have all of them. Lots of them that have two or three of them, but very few that have all. So here's why I choose the following features. Now, the first one, which I think is really important if you are going to be in front of the camera filming by yourself. If you have a crew or just a person who's helping you, then this becomes much less important. But if you are filming by yourself, arguably one of the most important features to have on a camera is a screen that flips forward to face you. Now, on some cameras, the screen can flip out to the side. It's a side hinge system. The benefit of a side hinge system is that it keeps the top of the camera clear, and that can be important for mounting other accessories like microphones or lights. The downside to a side hinge screen is that it generally flips out in a two-step process. You have to flip it out to the side and then twist it round. It's slower, it's less discreet. Some people don't like those because it slows down their normal style of photography. So other cameras have screens that only tilt vertically. There's some tilt up above the camera, some tilt down below the camera. In either case, they are going to block something. If they flip above the camera, then anything you mount on top is going to be in the way, and if they flip below the camera, well, it's going to be tricky to use it on a tripod. Now, before I go any further, Doug and I actually have two slightly different versions of the same camera, except with one subtle difference. Now, Doug is filming his side on the Sony A6300, whose screen does angle, but up by only 90 degrees, so it does not face him. On my camera, I have the Sony A6400, pretty similar in most respects, except that the screen now flips up by 180 degrees to face you. Now, it is blocked a little bit by the viewfinder housing. If I mount something on the hot shoe, well, that's going to get in the way as well. But I can just glance up to it and I can see that the camera is recording. I can see my position on the frame. Doug, how are you finding shooting blind on your A6300?
It makes me very nervous. You're exactly right. I mean, there's my camera right there. And if I could flip that LCD up, I could make sure that I'm properly framed. And even more important, this camera is limited to video shoots of only 30 minutes. And this show runs about 30 minutes. So I'm always nervous when we get to the end of the show. Is it still recording? If I could flip up that LCD, I'd be able to see the little red recording light. I would know when it was working. And as you mentioned in one of your videos, this camera's a little far away from me because I'm shooting with a 55mm lens, but I'd love to be able to reach up and touch the touch screen and control the camera. Can't do that without the tilting screen.
That's right. Now with the A6400, you don't even have that recording limit anymore. So I beat you on two regards there, Doug. And it is really useful. Now, I should also mention that some cameras resolve the problem as to whether the camera is recording video or not by flashing a light on the front. That's called a tally light. Fujifilm cameras have those. You can enable it in a menu. So even though not many of their cameras have got screens that face forward, most of them, or even all of them, have got this tally light feature. So at least you know that it's recording. Because I've done many pieces to camera where the screen does not face forward, and I thought I pressed the record button, but obviously when I play it back, all I got was like a shot of my foot that lasted for 1 second beforehand. Not very good. Although some people might argue maybe a bit better. But moving on. So anyway, the first thing, a screen that faces forward. Second thing is confident autofocus. Now, again, if you have a crew or a friend or someone who's behind the camera, they can make sure that you're in focus. But if you are filming by yourself, whether you're walking and vlogging, or even if you're just doing a piece to camera at home or in the office, as in fact Doug and I are doing in this environment, then you cannot underestimate how useful got a confident autofocus system is, because you may set up the focus, but then inevitably once you start talking, well, I always lean forward. I get very excited, I lean forward, or maybe I'm relaxing and I lean back. That's, I've just moved about 12 inches in distance, and if you're shooting at close range, you're going to be out of focus. The camera needs to refocus, and you want one that does it confidently, smoothly, without any hunting or searching. And the two best technologies for that are embedded phase, that's P-H-A-S-E, not face as in the thing with two eyes, a nose and a mouth, phase detection, autofocus. For example, Sony, Fujifilm, Olympus, in some of their cameras have embedded phase detect autofocus. The alternative technology, also Nikon has in its most recent bodies. The other technology is Canon's own dual pixel CMOS AF, which is essentially the same thing. It's a little bit cleverer, but the end result is the same on both of those. The cameras can confidently refocus as you move towards the camera or away from the camera. So good, confident autofocus is very important. Now, Panasonic does not use phase detect autofocus or dual pixel, that's Canon's own. And Canon has a number of smaller cameras which don't have dual pixel autofocus either. That doesn't mean you should rule those cameras out for vlogging or filming video, because in fact they could be amazing. They can be amazing for manual focus, and they can be amazing in environments where you're not moving back and forth too much. But I just wanted to mention that if you are going to be moving around, confident autofocus is the key. Now, Doug, your A6300 as well as my A6400 has embedded autofocus, and I can be pretty confident, hopefully you can as well, that since you also should have hopefully face detection enabled, the camera will be focusing on your face even with a slightly long lens and a shallow depth of field. Is that the case?
Yeah, it works very well. This is not too challenging, sitting in one place and moving back and forth 12 inches, but it does a very good job.
Yeah, well, I would say even this close, it does make a difference, 12 inches. If I move towards the lens on mine and move away, if you're watching the video version of this, you can see that, in fact, the camera did have to focus quite a lot to keep me sharp, but I'm confident it's doing a good job. So that's the second thing I look for. The third thing I look for would not be important in the environment that Doug and I are filming in now, because we have our cameras locked on tripods at the moment, so we don't have to worry about stabilization. But if you're out and about filming handheld, and you're vlogging, say, on the streets, as I do when I annoy people on the streets of Brighton, you need decent stabilization. This comes in many different flavors. There's optical stabilization in the lens. There's sensor-based stabilization in the body that shifts the sensor around. There is digital stabilization, which actually uses pure mathematics to try and counteract that by wrangling the pixels around. And there are various combinations of all three, which can further enhance the stabilization. It is really important, not just for people like me who shake quite a lot, but if you're walking around, bad or lack of stabilization can totally ruin the video. So that is the next thing that I look out for. Now, in my experience, I generally find that optical stabilization can be as effective as sensor-based stabilization for when you're shooting stills, but for video, maybe it's just the products that I've tested, but I generally find that sensor-based stabilization is more effective, and the most effective systems of all are those by Panasonic and Olympus in the Micro Four Thirds format. I find their sensor-based stabilization systems are absolutely remarkable, but basically any stabilization is better than nothing. Doug, whose stabilization system do you like?
Well, my favorites are the high-end Sony, the new cameras, including the RX100 Mark VII, but also Olympus. I think Olympus has what we've referred to as spooky stabilization. It actually seems to be smarter than I am. Very good. And one thing to mention here is that it's not obvious. Stabilization is not a checklist item. You can't just say, oh, it has stabilization or it doesn't. I encourage everyone to take a look at Gordon's individual review videos of these cameras, because for most of them, he's done a walking, vlogging segment. And you'll see that a lot of cameras that have image stabilization, it's not very good, or it has artifacts that are very disturbing. You get funny shakes and movements. So if you're looking at any of these cameras, I encourage you to look carefully at the image stabilization vlogging demos that Gordon does. There's quite a range of quality there.
Now, as much as I really like filming with the Sony APS-C cameras, Sony has a model, two models now with built-in stabilization in the APS-C format, the A6500 and the A6600. The stabilization on both of those cameras is the same. And for me, it's not that convincing, sadly. It does help. It does give you a benefit when shooting stills, but for video and vlogging in particular, it's just not good enough. Now, if you still like those systems, though, and you want better stabilization, and you're maybe not even getting it with an optically stabilized lens, the thing to do is to consider using a gimbal, and these are widely available now at different sizes for different loads. That's how heavy your camera and lens are, and for small mirrorless cameras you can get away with quite a small affordable gimbal costing only a couple of $100. Certainly way less than $500 will get you an excellent model that will make your stabilization look absolutely brilliant. So if you found a camera that you're in love with and it's perfect in every regard other than the stabilization, just consider getting a gimbal, because that effectively gives you that capability. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is audio quality, because believe it or not, one of the most important things about video is the sound. It is amazing how poor quality video you can get away with so long as the sound is good. If your sound is bad, people will hate your video. They will turn it off. We've all done it. Even if the content's really good, you're like, I cannot listen to this anymore. Audio quality is so important. Now, built-in microphones can only go so far. If you're in a very quiet room and you're very close to the camera, well, some built-in mics can be acceptable, but you cannot, again, underestimate the importance of being able to connect an external microphone, be it a lavalier microphone that will clip to your lapel, a shotgun microphone that you can mount on the top of the camera. All of these things have one thing in common, though. You need to plug them in. You need a socket on the camera, a microphone input to do this. If your camera doesn't have it, there are other things you could do. You could have a separate sound recorder. You could even use your phone in some instances to be recording the audio from an external mic. But believe me, when you've tried synchronizing audio from a separate recorder with your video track, it's a pain that you don't necessarily have to go through. If you've got an audio input on your camera, well, you know that sound is already going to be in sync. Now, Doug, you're actually doing that right now. Haven't you got a lav mic connected directly to A6300?
That's correct, and a world of difference between this and, as you say, either using a separate recorder or even a shotgun. So I'm very happy using the lavalier. As we say here, lavalier. Lavalier. It sounds such a grand word, doesn't it? Good evening, Mr. Lavalier. We've been expecting you. So, in terms of microphones, I would, if you're wondering what kind of microphone to get, I would really consider getting, if you're going to be doing pieces to camera, a lav mic, something that attaches to your lapel or shirt collar, because the distance between the mic and your mouth is so important. Shotgun microphones are great, but they're going to be a few feet away from you, and that's already a more challenging environment. It is, again, amazing what you can get away with a lav mic, because it is so close to your body, and if you have one of those fluffy covers on it, it becomes almost immune to any wind noise as well. So look for a camera, if you're into audio, look for a camera that has a microphone input. Although, again, if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. Try recording in a quiet environment, or use a separate sound recorder. I use a Zoom H2N, which works really well in that regard. And in fact, right now, the audio that you're listening to, I've recorded on my computer using a separate USB microphone. So, what do I know? I didn't even use the microphone input on my camera, even though it has one. Sorry about that. Now, so far, those are the top 4 things. There is a 5th thing. You'll be thinking, wait a minute, he hasn't even mentioned video quality yet. Well, yeah. 4K video, do you need it? Well, that's up to you, I would say in most cases not. And 4K does come with a lot of challenges. On a lot of cameras, there are some restrictions when you're filming 4K. It will almost always burn through your battery faster. It will almost always involve more processing power, which in turn makes the camera hotter, which in turn may cause it to overheat, reducing the maximum recording time. It will, of course, occupy more space in your memory card. It requires greater processing power. Sometimes there's a crop. Sometimes there's a reduction in the focusing performance. So there's a lot of challenges when filming 4K. If you feel that you can handle all of that and you've got the budget and the computer to handle it, then by all means go ahead. But do bear in mind that there are restrictions on a lot of cameras. So if you want
minimal restrictions with 4K, you're going to be spending a bit more money. Now, as an interesting aside, Doug, I'm old enough to have been on YouTube now since 2006. And when I started, for about my first year's worth of videos were all in standard definition. And that is because HD camcorders were ridiculously expensive and actually very few and far between at the time. And it was a big move for me to go to HD. But when I look back at my videos from 10 years ago or longer, those standard definition ones look horrible, absolutely horrible. And the HD ones just look so much better. Now, I'm not trying to say that perhaps we'll look back in 10 years' time at our 1080 videos and go, they look horrible. I wish I'd filmed everything in 4K, because I don't think the difference is as important as the jump from standard to high definition. I think that was really important. The jump from high definition to 4K is less important, but there is a benefit nonetheless. So if you do have the means, I would do it, which is why I record all of my camera reviews in 4K, but we do this podcast in 1080 because they're very, very big files. I'd never be able to upload them to YouTube otherwise. Doug, what's your feeling on 4K? Do you think it's really important? Is it critical? Would you advise people to use it kind of like in an archive way? Or if you're just doing like throwaway chats like these, how important is it?
Well, I think for vlogging, 1080p is fine. It's pretty much the state of the art. And again, I don't think anybody wants to manage 4K files that are this long. If you're doing a commercial video shoot, 4K, of course, is important. The only other advantage of 4K, of course, maybe not for vlogging, but for other situations, it gives you the opportunity to punch in. So you can take the 4K image and you can pan and scan. You can basically crop to a 1080p image. And so you have something to work with. I think that down the road, I think that the 4K thing isn't going to be a big deal, but I think when we get to 8K video, I've seen some 8K video, it's remarkable. And it's almost as much as the jump from standard def to HD in terms of difference when you go from 1080 to 8K. So that's a number of years down the road. I don't look forward to the file size, but for now, I think 1080p is fine, or 4K if you want to do punch-ins.
Yeah, the punching capability is very important. The other thing, though, that is worth mentioning before I move on to some product recommendations is that there's the frame rate to consider as well when filming between 1080 and 4K. Most cameras will film 1080 at 60p or even higher, whereas most cameras will only film 4K up to about 30p. There's only a handful that will film it at 50 or 60p, and that means that top frame rate of, say, 30p in 4K for many cameras means that you are not going to be able to shoot in slow motion. Whereas if you're filming 1080 at 60p, you have the opportunity to reduce that speed by 2 times or more if you have it on a 24p timeline. In a lot of cases, most cameras at around the $1,000 mark will even do 1080 at 100 or 120p, which gives you even more flexibility in that regard. So again, I've done some product photography, some kind of like hero shots or beauty passes where you go past a product, and those do look nice in slow motion. You're not even aware that you're watching slow motion a lot of the time, but to have it is useful. So filming in 4K, you may not be able to do that even on decent cameras. So now let's talk about some product recommendations. And the first thing to say is that you can vlog and film video with virtually any camera these days. I talked about all of those things earlier that I think make them better for vlogging or filming video, but that doesn't mean that you can't film video with something very simple. And in fact, you could film straight away with most phones and get really respectable output. Here's a little clip of a video where I did just that. I was about to enter a briefing in a London hotel, and I got the news that Canon was going to be adding 24p with a firmware update to many of its cameras. And I wanted to get that news out straight away because this was a really big deal in the filmmaking community, because not so much that everyone wants to shoot in a cinematic 24p, but that they've already got loads of 24p footage that they want to cut in. And to suddenly find that you now have to film in 25 or 30p, well, that's, those frame rates are not going to match, and there's going to be some artifacts. So it's important to have 24p if you shoot in 24p. So when Canon released a bunch of cameras in 2019 without that capability, we all rightly had a go at them. They listened, they responded, and they're now putting it back in almost everything that they've released in 2019 so far. So I wanted to get that news out quickly, and I didn't have another camera with me to do that. as quickly as I wanted to, so I used my phone. Now, the stabilization on my Galaxy S7 is terrible, so I needed somewhere to balance it, and I didn't have a little tripod for my phone, so what I did is I had my laptop with me, I opened the screen up, and I just balanced the camera against the screen and angled the screen back and forth until I got the angle that I wanted. I left it on a table outside the hotel. I was only about 1.5 feet away from the camera, so even though I didn't have an external microphone, I was close enough for half decent audio quality. So I did a real kind of run and gun setup there with my phone, and it was perfectly adequate. You don't necessarily need all that stuff. And also, you can enhance the capabilities of your phone. You can connect an external microphone to improve the sound quality. And Doug, you've also improved the stabilization with a gimbal designed for a phone, haven't you?
That's right. I have the original DJI Osmo Mobile for the iPhone, and I filmed some. I made one of my trips to Havana. I've been there 8 times. One of my trips, I took only my iPhone and the Osmo Mobile. That's hard to say. And I shot that way for a whole week, including a really nice long take of a few minutes just walking down the street at twilight in Havana. The gimbals are terrific.
Yeah, and once you have, it's very much like audio. When you get a decent quality mic, it's the same as when you get decent quality stabilization. It will absolutely transform your video, and people will look at it and they will not notice if it's 4K or 1080. You know, they won't notice these things, but they will notice that it is super smooth. Any kind of artifacts can snap you out at the moment, and people are no longer listening to your content. They're no longer watching you and trying to hear or, you know, listen to what you're saying. So, you know, if the focusing keeps drifting, that will put them off. If the stabilization is too shaky, that will put them off. If the audio is rubbish, that will put them off. So when you get these things right, it can really make the world of difference. Stabilization is so important. And that leads me, in fact, to my next recommendation, which is another DJI product. And this is the Osmo Pocket, which is an absolutely amazing tiny little device. This thing is so small, you can hardly believe it, but it actually has a fully stabilized kind of gimbal mounted camera on the top of it. This is arguably the ultimate vlogging camera. Now, my good friend Ben Harvey has been talking to me about this camera for ages, and this is in fact his model, so thank you, Ben. Ben does a load of really good video tutorials and vlogs and blogs, so check out his channel, Ben Harvey Photography. He also filmed me talking about the latest Fujifilm Instax product with this very camera. So if you want to see it in action, check out my video of that and the videos on his channel. So this thing is so small, you could just stick it in your pocket and it will film 1080 and 4K. The stabilization on this thing is fantastic because it's one of DJI's gimbals. It has a tiny screen on it, but it's good enough to see yourself. And you can also plug it into your phone if you want a bigger screen, and the phone also unlocks lots of it makes it easier for you to adjust the settings. And this thing, Doug, how much does an Osmo Pocket cost?
The Osmo Pocket comes in at $400 for the basic model. And I have to ask you, does it have a mic input?
Well, what it does have is a USB-C port underneath into which you can attach a variety of optional accessories, one of which is a 3.5mm analog microphone input. I really now it's a thing that sticks on the bottom, and I always worry about those, that they could snap off, and I don't want to have to pay for an accessory. Why doesn't it have a flipping microphone input as standard? That would be nice, but at least you can put a microphone adapter on it, and it works brilliantly with a lav mic. But for me, it's the stabilization and the size of this thing. You are not going to get better stabilization unless you go to a gimbal for a bigger camera, and then they become big and hefty. This thing is so small, it really is just going to fit in your pocket, and it's so good for running and gunning. So this would be my first recommendation, ideally with an external microphone. It ticks a lot of boxes. It ticks the stabilization, it ticks the box of the screen that faces forward. The autofocus is contrast based, but the lens is nice and wide, and the depth of field isn't that shallow, so it's not that challenging. It does have the audio input, and it will film 4K. It's a tiny little sensor, so don't expect miracles in low light, but otherwise this thing ticks so many boxes. That would be probably my first recommendation at that price point. Are you excited about it, Doug?
Well, I think the most important thing is you can go out that without You can go out with that and not be accused of using a selfie stick.
Okay, so that's the Osmo Pocket. Absolutely brilliant, especially if, like me, you wobble a bit or you're doing something else. If you want to vlog one-handed and you're moving around a lot, it is really good. And if you can also flip the camera around to film products and also film with it in the vertical orientation if you're doing IGTV or Instagram stories. The next camera that I'd recommend is actually an older version of a current model, if that makes sense. It's the Canon EOS M100, which is their entry-level mirrorless camera. Now, in 2019, it was updated with the M200, but there's actually very, very little difference to it. I would go for the original M100, especially now it's been discounted a bit. You get an APS-C sensor, that's a decent-sized sensor with dual-pixel autofocus, so you get the confident autofocus. The screen will face you. Although it flips vertically, so it can get blocked. There is stabilization optically in the lens. It doesn't have a microphone input. That is the downside to it. But Doug, how much does this camera cost?
This comes in at the same price as that Osmo Pocket, $399. Let's call it $400.
$400 for an APS-C interchangeable lens camera with dual pixel autofocus. It doesn't have a mic input, but it does do brilliant autofocus for 1080 video. You're getting stabilization in the lens. It is a cracking camera. And you can, of course, if you want a shallow depth of field, you can either adapt any number of Canon EF lenses, or if you've got a bit more money to invest, one of the few but still nice EF-M lenses for it, and have yourself a really nice filmmaking vlogging setup. But if you can go a little bit further, if you can spend a little bit more, I urge you, this is me urging you, to go instead for the Canon EOS M50 for several reasons. Now, first of all, Doug, how much is an EOS M50?
That's going to cost you $650 with the kit lens.
Okay, $650. So, you know, about $250 more. Yeah. So that's quite a bit more, but look at what it gives you. Okay, so the screen will tilt to face you, but it is a side-hinged, fully articulating screen. So it can flip out to the side. That means that the top is clear to accommodate an accessory, and yes, it has a microphone input, so you can mount a shotgun or a wireless receiver on top of the camera. It won't block the screen, which is flipped out to the side. It also has a viewfinder, which is not going to help you if you're vlogging, but is going to help you if someone else is filming you or you're using it for general photography. It does have 4K, but the 4K does not have great autofocus and it has a crop, so forget about that and just consider it a 1080 camera only. But with 1080, it will do brilliant autofocus. Not built-in stabilization, so again, you're relying on stabilized lenses, but for me, the M50 is a really compelling camera for video, whether you're vlogging in front of the camera or filming from behind it. Just the 4K, forget about the 4K, just think of it as a 1080 camera. And it's such a cute looking camera as well. It's styled like a mini DSLR, but it's really little. It's cute. What do you think of it?
It looks like a toy. No, I think it's great. It's a good little camera, definitely. I think it's...
It does look like a toy, but that's not a bad thing.
That's right.
Toys are nice.
No, I think it's...
Toys can be
I think it's fine. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the M50. I am.
It's fine. Here's another alternative if you want something that looks slightly less like a toy. I think maybe you think it looks like a toy because it's available in white as well as black. The white version does look a bit toy-like, but I like it. It looks like a stormtrooper from Star Wars. Also available in white or black, if you prefer, is the EOS 200D or Rebel SL2. Again, available in a newer version. 2019 saw the 250D or SL3, but I'm going to encourage you to get the older version because again, there's not much difference and it is even more affordable. Doug, how much is a 200D or SL2?
That comes in at $550 again with the kit lens.
$550, so that's $100 saving from the M50, and it's essentially the same. It's just that it's a DSLR version. So you get the side hinged touchscreen that gets out the way of the hot shoe where you can mount a microphone because it does have a microphone input. It has an APS-C sensor with dual pixel autofocus. Stabilization, unfortunately, still you need it in the lens, but that includes a kit lens that does have stabilization. So that is a cracking camera for $550. That is what I would go for if you can't afford to go up to the mirrorless version, which is the M50. And some people prefer the DSLRs. It's got an optical viewfinder which can extend the battery life, you know, works better in bright light conditions, blah blah blah. It's a really nice camera. So You'll notice actually that there's a lot of Canon products on this list, and that's because Canon is one of the few companies that does side hinge screens and has really brilliant autofocus in its interchangeable lens cameras. So it's already got a lot of the boxes ticked. We criticize Canon for a lot of things, but it does produce cameras that are really good for filmmaking and vlogging, and the colors also look really nice. That's another thing to consider. As Doug said, have a look at my separate vlogging videos for each of these, because like the skin tones and just the general processing of the image does change on these cameras. Some look better than others, and Canons to me always look really nice. Personal preference, of course. So let's spend a little bit more money and see what you can get. Now, if you want a vlogging camera that is very pocketable, obviously there was the Osmo Pocket, which we talked about earlier, but if you want a more kind of conventional looking point and shoot type camera, that's great for vlogging. How about the Canon G7X, now available in the Mark III version? Now, when this camera first came out, well, Doug, first of all, tell me how much you're going to spend on this.
That's $750, and this is a non-interchangeable lens camera.
Yeah, it is a fixed lens camera with a 1-inch sensor. It does not have phase detect autofocus. It's contrast based only. And when it first came out, it had some issues with autofocusing. It was a little bit sluggish, shall I say? Is that a kind word for it? It was not very responsive. It would refocus on you several seconds after you sat in front of it. Fine for what Doug and I are doing now. And plenty of people do tutorials and pieces to camera where they don't move much. But if you are a vlogger and you're moving around in a very dynamic environment, the camera's moving towards and away from you, or you're pointing it at other things, it just didn't focus very quickly. We complained, Canon listened, and it has already updated the firmware for that model and has promised it for the G7X Mark II as well, which was released at the same time, where it offers now an additional autofocus mode that's more responsive. In fact, it's a little bit too responsive. Sometimes it goes, hey, I've got you in focus. No, I'm going to focus on that bird. No, I'm going to focus on that tree or that light. But at least it gives you the choice. So if you're filming a more dynamic type video in a more dynamic environment, then choose that mode. And if you're doing more of a static piece to camera like Doug and I are doing now, then choose the original mode. And it's still a really good camera. The colors look absolutely great. It's got a screen that flips up to face you. Stabilization is built into the lens. It's okay. It also has a microphone input, and it is the first of those small cameras to have a microphone input. So that is a really important feature. Now, the one thing that this camera is let down by is its autofocusing. It is good enough for some situations, but it's not as confident as a full phase detect system. Now, if you want phase detect autofocus in this style of camera, only Sony is offering it right now in the 1-inch class, and that is with the RX100 series, and it introduced phase detect from the RX100 Mark V, which is now the 5A, onwards. So, Doug, how much is the RX100 VA? 5A? How would you say it? The VA?
I think I'd call it the 5A, but I'm not sure. But it's $1,000 camera.
$1,000.
Yeah.
Now, it's not gone down in price. It's still quite an expensive camera. That's $250 more than the G7X Mark III. So yes, it does have phase detect autofocus, so it will focus confidently. It does have a screen that flips up and blah blah blah. It's got good quality 4K, but it doesn't have a microphone input. It's $250 more than the Canon, and it doesn't have a microphone input. So this is, you've got to really want that autofocus. Now, it is really good on it. So then you start asking yourself, if only Sony did a version of it with a mic input. Well, they do. That's the RX100 Mark VII. Now, how much is the Mark VII?
The Mark VII, which I own, is $1,300. So you're paying $300 for a mic jack.
Yeah, so now you're getting more than just the mic jack. Of course, you're also getting a much longer zoom range with the Mark VI and the Mark VII. Sony ditched the old zoom lens of the Mark V, and they put on a super zoom, which gives you enormous flexibility in terms of range. It zooms to, I think, 200mm with really good quality. And they added a microphone input on the Mark VII. Brilliant. But unfortunately, the lens is dimmer. It's not as bright as the one on the 5 from the 5A. And that's really important when you're filming video and shooting stills, especially in video though, because it means you can shoot at lower ISOs, you get better quality, you also have more of an opportunity to blur the background, to have a shallow depth of field effect. And they also lost the built-in neutral density filter on the 6 and the 7 when they went to that longer zoom range. So that kind of draws you back to the 5, because that has the nice bright lens, it has the ND filter, but it doesn't have the microphone input. Doug, you switched, I think, from the shorter zoom to the longer zoom version, and you're kind of semi-regretting it, aren't you?
Yeah, I had the Mark IV, and I switched to the Mark VII. And although I love the fact that I have the longer zoom, I very much miss the faster lens. So I'm actually thinking of downgrading to the VA or the 5A, give up the long focal length but get the faster lens back.
And the lack of the microphone input doesn't really bother you because
No.
you're probably not recording audio on that camera.
Correct.
It still makes my shortlist though. I really like the 5A because its autofocus is very good. The lens is bright. You have the ND filter. I just wish they'd do a 5B, a VIB version with a mic input. Sony, it would be the perfect vlogging camera. It's like the EM5 Mark III. You know, we were talking about it for so long. Olympus, just put this sensor in the Mark II and it's perfect. It's finished. You can go home. And it's the same with Sony. You know, we've been saying it for years and they haven't done it. They're maybe trying to differentiate that product from phones because, you know, why would you spend $1,000 on a compact when you can get like an iPhone 59, which has got 3 cameras built into it and looks amazing and has computational photographic power at its disposal? Well, the one thing that the phones can't do is have a long zoom. So Sony's gone, right, let's put a long zoom in the small camera. And I fear that is the way it's going to go going forward. Hopefully I'm wrong. But anyway, that's my next recommendation. Now we're beginning to spend a bit of money now, and you know, if you're up to about $1,000 for that confident autofocus, remember you can rewind and go for that Canon interchangeable lens camera, the 200D or SL2, for only about $550, and it does give you the confident autofocus, but it's big. It's not going to fit in your pocket. Even the M50, the mirrorless version, won't fit in your pocket. So these are the different things you're going to have to weigh up. And again, you'll be thinking, oh, now I get it. Now I know why there's a whole channel, Camera Conspiracies, is convinced that there is no perfect camera because, you know, the manufacturers want to keep us upgrading and talking about it. And it does fuel so many of our discussions. So yeah, there isn't the perfect camera. Or is there? One of the best cameras for vlogging I found is the Olympus OMD EM5 Mark III. How much does that camera cost, Doug?
You can get that camera for $1,200 for the body only, or $1,500 with the 14-to-150.
So in fact, in its body-only configuration, not dissimilar to a Sony RX100 Mark VII in price, it's obviously a much chunkier camera, although it's small for an interchangeable lens camera. The reason that you get this is because it has absolutely amazing built-in stabilization. It will film 4K, good quality 4K, only up to 30p though. It has a microphone input. It has phase detect autofocus at last, so it has the confident autofocus and the side hinge screen that flips forward to face you. So it ticks a lot of those boxes that I mentioned earlier. Forward facing screen, confident autofocus, amazing stabilization, and an audio input, and 4K. It gives you all five ticks. And how much was it again? $1,300, $1,200 for the body?
$1,200 for the body.
So is that the perfect camera? Has Olympus created the perfect filming camera? Almost. Not quite. Because if you're being really fussy, and I am being a bit fussy, it doesn't have auto ISO in manual mode, which I use all of the time. So that's a bit frustrating if you want to control your exposure with ISO when you're filming. In manual, there are ways around that. I believe you can also, you can start off in a stills mode and trick it into inheriting its settings when you switch it into the movie mode by pressing the record button. So there are little hacks, there are tricks. I'd prefer it was done properly. Maybe they'll do that with a firmware update. We'll see. We complained enough to Canon and they did it. Maybe Olympus will too. So at the higher end, I'd suggest something like an EM5 Mark III or something like a Panasonic Lumix G9. This camera has fantastic stabilization. It'll do 4K up to 60p, so you have your slow motion there. Autofocus, of course, there's got to be a downside to it somewhere. The autofocus is not as confident as some of the others because it's not phase detect, but it may be good enough. I enjoy shooting with this camera a lot. Doug, remind us how much a G9 is going to cost.
G9 is only $1,200 for the body alone. So it's actually the same price as the EM5 Mark III.
Now, let's say you've got more money than, I was going to say more money than sense.
Yeah.
That's not true. Let's say you've just got a higher budget, or let's say you want a camera that's really amazing for stills and you've got some more money to spend. So what does spending more money get you? Well, generally speaking, it will get you a bigger sensor. If you're spending $1,500 and up, you're going to get a minimum of APS-C. You're probably going to start moving into the full frame market. going to give you great high ISO performance and an easier opportunity to get really shallow depth of field effects. Now, one of my favorite cameras in that regard would be the Canon EOS R, a camera which was criticized by many, including myself. It has a lot of downsides, but you know, it ticks a lot of boxes for video. The 4K is cropped, forget about that. Let's just look at that. Nice full frame 1080, side hinge screen, microphone input, chance to mount lenses with confident autofocus. You could put like a 24mm f1.4 on that and you would have decent coverage with a nice blurry background. It looks absolutely amazing. I believe that's the setup that Tony and Chelsea Northrup use, and their videos always look really, really nice. So if you want that kind of almost 3D effect, then that's really good. Beyond that, I mean, the interesting thing is that Sony, on their full frame cameras, which do everything other than have a side hinge screen or a screen that faces forward, I've still vlogged very successfully with them because I know their autofocus is so good. I can just hold it in front of me and I know that if the camera's pointing at me, I know I'm going to be in focus. So you can actually vlog quite successfully with those products. But again, Canon has really nailed it by offering a side hinge screen on a larger format system. Panasonic, of course, now has the S1H if you want to do that with full frame, but that's getting into some serious money now. So of those products, Doug, of my recommendations, are there any that would appeal to you to hit the streets and start doing the San Francisco vlogs that we've always wanted from you?
Well, I mean, of all the cameras you mentioned, the OMD EM5 Mark III is probably my favorite of the cameras. For general use. The fact that it's a good vlogging camera, or pretty good vlogging camera, is nice too. You know, I love the RX100s. I've had them for many years. I think I think those are probably my favorites, but I'm looking at a camera that can also double as a really good still photography camera, not just a vlogging camera.
And that's what I really like about products like, say, the EOS M50 and the 200D or SL2, is that they are, you know, fully fledged interchangeable lens cameras that also happen to be really good at video, tick almost all the boxes, and are affordable too. But you know, my head has been turned and my heart is calling out for the little DJI Osmo Pocket, because this is an amazing little vlogging camera. Again, I'm also a big fan of the RX100 VA, and at the higher end, the Olympus EM5 Mark III, especially if they put in that auto ISO in manual. So we'd love to hear what you think. Have any of these camera or equipment combinations turned you on or turned you off in particular? Do you think that one is much better than the other? Are you using any of them? Let us know what works for you in the comments.
Very good. And again, I'll mention that Gordon has done detailed reviews for all of these cameras. Please go to cameralabs.com, look at them, and particularly pay attention to the demonstration of vlogging, the handheld walkthroughs that Gordon does. They're very informative, and you'll realize the strengths and weaknesses of all of these cameras. Once again, if you can, buy us a cup of coffee. Go to cameralabs.com, click on the buy a cup of coffee. Gordon and I are desperate for coffee at all hours of the day. You can also buy Gordon's books there. He's got some over his shoulders there. In camera, he's got, what languages are those in, Gordon?
Well, there's one in English, and I've got one in Italian here. It's also available in French and in Czech as well. So if you speak any of those languages, you may well enjoy it. Yeah. Or in the original native English version, as spoken through my own native tongue.
And what about the t-shirts?
Yes, if you want to look like me, buy a Cameralabs t-shirt. There are 3 designs available, one with an AeroPress, one with this design which is like a kind of crest on a beer pump, and the other one is a kind of X-ray type image of me holding a camera. Actually, coincidentally, an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark I, as I recall. But anyway, there you go. You can support us and look fashionable and cool at the same time. What better value is there on the internet today?
And once again, you can give us likes, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and come back and watch future episodes of the Cameralabs Cafe podcast. Thank you, Gordon. We'll see you next time.